Taxis in Britain, particularly in the capital London, are globally recognised and iconic parts of British motoring. Everyone in Britain has been in a black cab at some point, whether it be to the airport or back home from a night out. They're an inevitable parts of life on the island. The history of them predates cars, and I'll also delve into the recent sustainable taxi, as well as what the future could hold for British taxis. As always, if you enjoy, please like and subscribe. The London cab can be traced back to hackney coaches, which began to appear in the 1620s. They were able to be hired on the streets and became popular. Across the next few centuries, the coaches and carriages became faster, safer, and more luxurious, but there were no major changes to the format. This was the case until the motorised vehicle began to hit the streets. Initially electric, they were made by the London Electrical Cab Company, though they were commonly known as Birseys, due to the name of the designer, Walter Bersey. The design was pretty basic, and it was powered by an electric motor, though the power output isn't known, and is estimated to be somewhere between 3 and 8 horsepower, with a top speed around 12 miles per hour. There were 40 small batteries, weighing 711 kilos in total, and provided 30 to 35 miles of range, which wasn't really enough for a full day of driving, but a modified version with larger batteries was later sold. 77 were sold in total, and they were popular with the punters, as the rates were the same as for horses and were quieter and more luxurious. However, due to the weight of around 2 tons, they needed replacement tyres and batteries quite often, and weren't reliable. They were also often slower than horse-drawn transportation. It was unprofitable, and the cab company lost over £6,000 in its first year. In 1899, just 2 years after the fleet hit the roads of London, the company closed and the cabs were withdrawn. Other motorised models followed, and by the time World War I began, there were 7 motorised taxis for every horse-drawn one. The last horse-drawn taxi services stopped in London in 1947, although they continued elsewhere. Foreign companies like Fiat and Renault supplied cabs, but Beardmore taxis were generally considered the best on offer. They were some of the fastest, were known for being reliable and comfortable. Total production of Beardmores across the 7 generations is unknown, but around 650 of the final generation were made. Austin also made modified 12.4s to meet the demand for taxis. The first model was known as the High Lot due to the high roof, and it was the most popular cab on the roads. The 1934 model was known as Low Loading, as it had a new chassis and was 7 inches shorter vertically. It featured a high level of equipment for the time. The last generation before the war was made to be more like a regular Austin 12. World War II obviously stopped production of civilian vehicles, leading to a change of taxis after it. The first major taxi launched after the war was the Nuffield Oxford, also known as the Wolseley Oxford, which was the first new taxi to comply with the conditions of fitness for taxis in London. It was first developed in 1940 as a Laundelet and covered 300,000 miles in testing during the global conflict. It was changed to a hardtop for production and had a similar layout to previous taxis. It was powered by an inline 4 using MGs and used a 4-speed gearbox. There were some slight improvements across the 3 generations. They were largely similar, and a total of 1,926 were made. After Nuffield merged with Austin to form the British Motor Corporation, the Oxford was replaced by the Austin FX3, which became the definitive taxi at the time. There were 2 other prototypes, but the FX3 was the one chosen for production, which commenced in 1949. Just like previous taxis, it had a 3-door body and an open luggage area instead of a passenger seat. A 2.2 litre OHV engine was paired with a 4-speed gearbox, but this engine was thirsty, and many were converted to a diesel, prompting the manufacturer to offer one from 1956 with great success. It had a tight turning circle, just 7.6 metres in diameter, complying with London rules. The FX3 was a massive success, with 12,435 produced, including the 4-door FL1 based on the taxi, which also spawned some quite interesting applications in small quantities. Production ceased in 1958, but they were used for another decade in London and much longer elsewhere. The replacement for the FX3, the FX4, is perhaps the most iconic taxi ever, setting the precedent design-wise for future black cabs. It was the first 4-door production London cab, and production began in late 1958. The first available model had a 2.2 diesel engine and automatic gearbox, with a manual from the Austin Gypsy being added in 1961 and a 2.2 litre petrol engine arriving the following year. A replacement was intended but never arrived, so in 1969 a slight facelift was introduced with some changes to the lights and their positioning and a quieter, roomier interior which was popular. The FX4D went on sale in 1971 with a larger 2.5 litre diesel engine which was popular with the auto gearbox. The petrol option was discontinued in 1973. The owner of the producer, Car Bodies, was taken over, and this led to a few small safety changes. Car Bodies took over the IP rights for the FX4 when British Leyland no longer wanted it. The FX4R used a 2.3 litre Land Rover diesel, a similar petrol engine, though engine swaps were popular for more reliability and performance. Power steering and servo brakes modernised the mechanics, but there were also chassis problems. The FX4Q used old chassis and suspension bits to rectify problems with the R and the old 2.5 litre engines. All had automatic gearboxes, but the R didn't have power steering. London Taxis International was formed after the Car Bodies parent company bought a taxi dealer. The FX4S used a 2.5 litre Land Rover derived diesel engine, and there were slight improvements to the interior, but little had actually changed during the FX4's lifetime. A new taxi was being developed, but funding problems stopped this. The FX4S Plus allowed 5 passengers in the rear, and there was a new dashboard and trim, while the FX4W made a taxi wheelchair accessible. The Fairway introduced a 2.7 litre Nissan diesel, though the old Land Rover engine could still be had. The new engine was faster and more reliable though, while the Fairway was fully wheelchair friendly and allowed LTI to finally sell cabs in places other than London. However, the writing was on the wall due to new emissions regulations banning the cabs in their current form from London unless they were converted to less polluting engines from 2006. The Fairway, now considered good but ancient, was replaced in 1997 by an all-new model. Over 75,000 were sold in total across all the different models and brands. The TX1 was an all-new taxi designed by a legendary Kenneth Grange, aimed to modernise taxis yet still encapsulate the classic FX4. The shape and appearance was recognisably similar to that of the outgoing model. The chassis was the same as that of the Fairway, but the new body allowed more space and more comfortable experience for the driver and passengers. It continued to use a 4-cylinder Nissan diesel, renowned for being almost bulletproof, leading to some people using TX1s as personal cars due to the low cost of maintenance. There was also a divide between the driver and the rear area, with an intercom system for communication between them. The TX2 replaced the TX1 in 2002, with an almost identical appearance, and there were only minor improvements inside. There was an anti-theft system, making it harder for passengers to escape without paying. The Nissan engine was ditched and replaced with a 2.4 litre Ford Duratorque inline-4 diesel. This supposedly had 21% more torque, but it was unpopular as it was incredibly unreliable in comparison to the Japanese engine, leading many taxi drivers to stick with the TX1 or FX4. In 2006, Geely bought a share of the company with the intention of producing taxis in China for China. The name was changed to the London Taxi Company in 2010. Before this, the new TX4 launched. The design is recognisably different, with a new grille, new bumpers all round, and an updated interior. The engine for the UK market was a 2.5 litre diesel with 101 horsepower and a 5-speed automatic gearbox, whereas other countries also got a more powerful Mitsubishi 4-cylinder petrol and a manual. The name comes from the engine being Euro 4 compliant, and it has since been updated twice to meet newer regulations. The TX4 spawned a small fleet of hydrogen prototypes, as well as a couple of spin-offs for the Chinese market, as it's been sold around the world. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how many were sold, but they're still very common on UK roads, despite the newer model being on sale for quite some time now. In 2012, the holdings company that owned LTC went into administration, but Geely rescued the taxi business, forming the London Electric Vehicle Company. The Chinese powerhouse invested £480 million into developing a new vehicle, the TX, which went into production in 2017. It was built on a new bespoke platform. The design is a modern take on previous taxis, most noticeably the FX4. It also features suicide doors, which were last seen on that model. Due to bans of diesel taxis, the need for them to be zero emissions in London, the TX is powered by a 110 kilowatt motor, providing 148 horsepower. There is a 33 kilowatt hour battery pack, which is recharged by a Volvo-derived 1.5 litre turbo 3-cylinder. It offers a range of up to 377 miles. The TX has been received well, with its handling being praised, and plenty have been sold due to it being the only conventional taxi allowed in London. It has been sold all around the world, with around 9,200 currently registered on UK roads. It also has spawned a few spin-offs, including the Access for patient transport and the Shuttle, while the VN5 is an electric van, clearly based on the TX. Taxis are becoming more relevant in the UK, less so London, thanks to apps like Uber and the availability of private hire, so the future of the taxi industry is unlikely to be as bright as it once was.